Good afternoon, everybody. I'm named Tui after a small forest bird that was going extinct when I was born. So my community set me on this path of working to protect Mother Earth. And for the past 15 years, I've worked in a professional capacity on traditional knowledge-based approaches to catchment management, policy development, monitoring and impact assessments. And for the past 6 years on supporting the establishment and growth of regional and global Indigenous networks with a focus on genetic diversity preserved by Indigenous knowledge, innovations and practices which improve food security and adaptation to climate change. So some of our Pacific members of Te Kopu, our organisation, are using traditional knowledge indicators for predicting and responding to climate. Others are adapting their crops for resistance to saltwater and droughts. And others we've set up to undertake community cultural indicator monitoring, which also aligns to other Indigenous communities around the world with the intention to produce global reports that can feed into UN mechanisms. In fact, there are many examples around the world of best practice, community managed, resilient landscapes, providing multiple food products, thus contributing to food and livelihood security. However, support and uptake has been very limited. In some instances, in fact, it is considered illegal. To assist in uptake and knowledge exchange, part of our work was to assist in the production of the IITC Asia Pacific report, recently confirmed in Colombia. IITC being the Intergovernmental Policy Science Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. That report, in fact, includes, since we assisted in its development, 397 references to Indigenous peoples. So, in fact, it also recognises the need of customary laws to empower and involve Indigenous peoples and their customs more broadly and the protections of ecosystems and their services. I'd like to stress today that land and water rights are key to ecosystem protection and delivers greater mitigation and adaptation and food security. Strengthening communities and people's resilience to climatic variability and extremes must recognise Indigenous peoples as partners in the Zero Hunger movement. Greater support and meaningful partnerships are needed for Indigenous people's knowledge, innovations and practices. Meaningful partnerships includes monitoring and reporting at local, regional and global levels that are co-developed and which respects traditional knowledge, methodologies and management. In my own country, Aotearoa, New Zealand, I designed the cultural indicator reporting Indigenous communities responding to poor ecosystem health for the Kauri dieback management program, supported by the Ministry for the Primary Industries. The kauri is the tree which we as Indigenous peoples fashion our ocean voyaging canoes from. Some of you may now know about our Polynesian voyaging culture since the Disney movie Moana. And the kauri tree is a keystone species in the forest. In our culture, there are over 120 species which live on and close to the kauri tree. This indicator program is now being piloted in 3 Indigenous communities, and our next steps are to use traditional plant knowledge to build resilience and consider biocontrols for the health of our forests. These types of partnerships for Indigenous monitoring and management are already informing global decisions at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and can inform the work and decision-making of the CFS. Our Indigenous and local knowledge centres of distinction responded to the need for better reporting on the UNCBD Aichi targets, particularly Target 18 on traditional knowledge and biodiversity. The indicators for which are status and trends for linguistic diversity, for land tenure, for traditional occupations, and for the full and effective participation in the review of national biodiversity statements and action plans. Our response was the recently Indigenous-produced Local Biodiversity Outlooks, which is now recognised as a complementary paper to the UNCBD Global Biodiversity Outlooks. We're now working on the second version of the LBO. To conclude, as previous speakers today have highlighted, there is a lack of resources available for the work to be done. Therefore, better harmonisation across UN mechanisms can promote enhanced engagement coherence and effective respectful partnerships with Indigenous peoples and civil society can achieve zero hunger in 2030. There is no time for incremental steps. Much like my Polynesian ancestors, may we be bold. May we look beyond the horizon to explore new solutions and partnerships to save Mother Earth and one another. Thank you.